Alright, hello, my name's Caesar, and I made this song in support of Von's Veganic gardening question time, and yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Peace.
You're about to hear some top class organic fucking allotment rap. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I be bored under the money tree, it's kind of a rapper, but really only give a off about the flowers growing next to me. Lettuce to celery, lessons in letters, while letting the veg grow. Sunstorms, hail blow, but still I'm here, digging up potatoes in my big old brown coat. It's locked down, so all these harvests come in handy, and it's healthy to be grafting on some ground that's really asking for tomatoes. I might smoke a Marlboro or sprout an avocado. It really takes its time so slow. Yo, it really takes its time so slow. Practice my patience or spacing apart the plants in the plot. I'm raking all these leaves which biodegrade into good soil. Hey yo, soil where I choose to toil. I don't support the wars for stolen oil, temper boils. I don't support having poison covering food and royals richer than everyone else, or CEOs who never loyal to no one but the dough. Yeah, to no one but the dough. So I'm sticking to my homegrown, from sticky icky to chili, zucchini and spinach. I never won't, no.
Yeah, man. It's all about this allotment business, you get me? What, like £60 for a whole year, man. And like, I bring home these fat stacks of you know, kale and perpetual spinach and all that. Do you know what I mean? What do you know about organic food? You don't know nothing about that, man. And it, yo, honestly, bro, just try it, fam. Allotments, you know what I mean?
In support allotments, bro. The Allotment Act in whatever year it was a very important act in the UK history. Right up there with the Ramblers Act, alright?
Welcome everyone. Hi to the Vegan Organic Network Gardeners Question Time, where today's panelists will answer some of your questions about gardening with people, the planet and animals in mind. So if you haven't seen Gardeners Question Time here before, just stay tuned. And then afterwards, you can check out the Vegan Organic Network YouTube channels as well, where there's lots of videos, and under the live tab you can see all the previous live recordings of these GQTs as well. So loads of info. So I hope you've all had a lovely week, and if you do celebrate Christmas, I hope you've enjoyed the festivities. And before we get started, thank you so much to Dan for asking me back here to host the GQT again today, and also for all your work behind the scenes too. So I'm Ellen Mary. I'm a vegan gardener, author, speaker, and just about anything else that helps to spread knowledge about the benefits of gardening for well-being, for the well-being of all species that live on our glorious planet. So just to let you know that from next year, I'm going to be running some plant-based retreats in the UK and guided forest bathing walks as well, which I'm really excited about. Whereas a group, we will immerse in the magic of the forest and learn how to better connect with the natural world. So yeah, please check me out to find out a little bit more about that. So we have some fantastic panelists tonight with a wealth of knowledge to answer your questions that have already been sent in. So firstly, let's meet this evening's panel members, who are each going to tell us a little bit more about themselves. And firstly, we have Maureen Robertson. Maureen is a medical herbalist running Herbal Path in Portugal. So hi Maureen, thank you for being here this evening and being on the panel. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and what you do?
Hi Ellen, yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been living in Portugal for the last 8 years and having a very challenging time of switching my gardening knowledge to dealing with the dryness and the hardness of the soil, and yes, lack of water, and the summertime is kind of like the winter here for the plants. They all have to hunker down to survive the summer. But most of my gardening life was spent in Scotland. I lived in Scotland for 25 years and on the Isle of Arran for 15 years. And we grew as much as we possibly could there, but the weather just started to get more and more erratic. And in the end up, it was becoming much more difficult to grow anything much. So yes, I'm very happy to be able to share anything that is useful with reference to the questions that are coming up. I'm a practicing herbalist. I see patients here. My dispensary is, I would say, half stocked from what I can grow and wild harvest from here. And the rest I buy in that I either can't grow enough of in my cultivated beds or just can't grow here at all. I can't grow nettles or dandelions or cleavers here, which is really on my land. Yeah, there's some areas where there's valleys that are a little bit more moist where I can wild harvest. But yes, I'm having a completely different experience of gardening these last few years.
I bet, like, the contrast between where you were to where you are now must be really extreme. But I'm also with gardening with the very dry land and not so much moisture. That's something that some of us are going to have to start perhaps preparing for the future, in other countries as well. So that knowledge is going to be really crucial for some of us too. I really must ask you a question. Do you have any New Year growing resolutions or any events or any plans that you've got for 2023 that you'd like to share?
Well, I have regular open days and open apothecaries days. So maybe every quarter, every 3 months, I'll open up the herb farm and people can come in and I do a little tour around the gardens and then we drink some tea. And then I open up the apothecary because I don't have a shop or a commercial outlet as such. I just really grow and provide medicines for my patients and for my students. And so this is an opportunity for anyone to just turn up and be able to rummage through the dispensary and see what they'd like to try out at home. So there I just had one there at the beginning of December, and I'll probably have another one in March when the wildflowers are starting to be around and there's a lot more to see.
Wonderful. Where can anyone watching this find out more about you then, or about those open days?
Yes, thank you. So my website is theherbalpath.net, and I put up any events or I do a monthly plant study, which can be done by Zoom as well. I have an online group. And also I do tea tasting. I send out a monthly tea tasting, which is blind exercise for people to get past what they think something might be. It's better to, if you don't know something, you've got a better chance of using your intuition and really letting the plant communicate to you on its own terms rather than what you think you know about it. So I post out dried herbs to people who want to join in from outside the live sessions. So they're monthly events and the dates are on the website.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to be looking them up. I don't know about anyone else. I'm sure you will have some other people interested as well. Well, looking forward to chatting with you over the questions very shortly. Thank you. So our next panelist is Piers Warren. So for those of you who come to these GQTs regularly, you will have seen Piers before. Piers is a conservationist, author and keen grower of organic fruit and vegetables. Hello Piers again. Hi, how are you?
Hi, yeah, good, thanks.
Good. So tell us a little bit more about yourself for those that don't already know and what you're doing at the moment.
So I currently live in East Sussex, about 2 miles from the sea, but on a bit of a hill, so fairly exposed conditions. And prior to here, I have lived in Wales, just 100 yards from the sea. So I'm used to some quite rough weather. I've had greenhouses blow away before now. But yes, this year I'm looking forward to growing some new stuff. I only moved here 6 months ago, so I'm sort of creating a garden from scratch because it was just a bare square of lawn. So I've already put the backbone in of a nice greenhouse and some raised veg beds. I've planted fruit trees. So this year is going to be all about the sowing of new vegetables, both annuals and perennials and all sorts. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I grow on a garden and an allotment scale, not commercially. So I can answer questions about, for people who want to grow food at home, which is what I try and encourage as many people as possible to do.
Absolutely. And you have books as well. What can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I've written a number of books. The one that's most relevant to tonight is called The Vegan Cook and Gardener, which I produced with my daughter, Ella Glendinning, who is also vegan. And the first half of the book is all about how to grow all the fruit and veg that we can. And then the second half is the recipes that come from that. And they're arranged month by month with the idea that we're growing and eating as seasonally as possible. So each recipe in June, for example, will focus on the crops in our own garden that will be ready for harvesting in June.
That's useful because often, the books will tell you what you can sow and grow in that month, but knowing what to do with your harvest as well is just as important, isn't it? And reducing waste as well too. And where can viewers find that book? Can it be found online?
Yeah, it's online in all the usual places, but of course we recommend you go to the Vegan Organic website, which has a shop that features a number of books, and it actually does our book for a really good price. So that would be my first recommendation. veganorganic.net.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing your answers to some of the questions very shortly as well. So this evening, there's a very special guest, Juliet Bryant, who's a nutritional consultant. And Juliet is here to tell us about an up and coming event. Hi, Juliet. Welcome to the GPT. Tell us all about the event.
Well, last month we hosted our first vegan organic foraging question time, and it went down such a storm that we're doing it again on January the 18th at 7 p.m. So we've got a beautiful panel of foragers, herbalists, and we're going to talk about what you can find. It's amazing that this time of year, a lot of people think you can't find much out in nature, but actually there's still an abundance out there for us to go and harvest from and make medicines and delicious foods.
That sounds so good. So this is the 18th of January. Is that 7 p.m. same time again?
Exactly, 7 p.m. UK time, and there's going to be 4 of us answering questions about what we do. Is we go through a plant that you can find at this time of year. So we're going to create quite a nice compodium for people to go back and reference, over the months of what you can forage throughout the year.
That sounds really nice. And also at a time of year where we're not getting outside perhaps quite as much as we want to or we should do. So, knowing that there's something out there for you to go and find is really exciting. I think kind of winter foraging, I don't know, there's something just really homely about it, and just you feel very connected when you get outside and do it at a time of year where there's not much there.
Exactly.
Or you think there's not much there.
It's quite magical.
Yeah, absolutely magical. So thank you, Juliet.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to coming along and watching that for sure. I was saying before that I'm still a little nervous about foraging for fungi right now. So maybe I'll learn something when I come along on the 18th of January. Thank you very much, Juliet.
Thank you.
So we have got quite a few questions to get through, so I think we had better get started. So all of that sounds amazing, but of course you're all here to have some of your questions answered. So we'll get started, shall we? The very first question is from Ella in Brighton. So are you ready, Maureen and Piers? Ella was given a heated propagator for Christmas, and as I've never had one before, can the panel recommend the most productive ways to use it, please? Any tips for Ella in Brighton with a heated propagator?
Yes, I can kick off if you like. I've got a heated propagator which I use every year, and in fact I'll be firing it up in just a few weeks' time. And the main advantage of a heated propagator is it enables you to start off seedlings that need to have quite a long growing season. So this includes things like tomatoes, peppers, chilies, aubergines, things like that, which need a fairly warm environment for the seeds to germinate, and then quite a long growing season before they will fruit in the summer. So the idea is that you sow them in the propagator in February, which is a common time for those plants I've just mentioned, and then grow them on in the propagator for a month or two, depending on how fast they grow and what size they are. And then you can move them into a greenhouse or a conservatory or your kitchen windowsill and grow them on until it's warm enough for them to go outside. There are two types of propagator. The expensive posh ones have a thermostat where you can actually set the temperature you want. And if you look on the back of most seed packets, it will say the ideal temperature to germinate seed. So often it's something like 18 degrees C. So you can set your propagator to 18 and off you go. Simple. But the more common propagators, which is like the ones that I've got, which are less expensive, it just simply has a heated pad at the bottom. So you must bear in mind that this will heat the propagator to maybe 4, 5, 6 degrees warmer than the temperature of the room that it's in. So I really recommend, if that's the type you've got, you also get a little thermometer that you can stick inside the propagator and then try it out in various different rooms in your house until you find out where it's the ideal temperature. If, for example, you stick it in an unheated conservatory or porch or something like that, and it's really cold in February, then even inside a heated propagator, it might not be warm enough to get your seeds going. So you need to experiment with that. But it's a really useful piece of kit.
Thank you. That was very thorough. Maureen, do you have anything to add to that? Any tips or advice for using heated propagators?
Yeah, many years ago, I also used propagator, and we used to put tin foil underneath it to try and preserve a bit more heat. And we had it in front of a window because as soon as the seeds germinate, obviously you need to have enough light for them to get going. Yeah, that's really all I need to add. I think Piers said it all. That was very useful information.
Yeah, so basically they can extend your growing season. You can get things started a little bit earlier, which some of us are very keen on doing. Just can't wait to get the seeds sown, but it's too cold. So yeah, heated propagators are great. So I hope that's helped you, Ella, in Brighton. So our second question, this is from Joe. And Joe says, what are your thoughts on ivy and when should I plant it? Who would like to take that one first?
I can say something about that. So, I mean, ivy is it's such a stunning plant to see covering a wall or covering ruins and things like that. But it does take over if you're growing it on the side of a building. I remember having a little pot plant about that big, and after a few years, it had taken over the whole wall going up on the side of the house. And when we removed it, it had started to penetrate into the mortar of the bricks. So that's what I would just point out, how prolifically it grows and how it's quite aggressive with its feelers to get a foothold. When to plant it? Well, it flowers later in the year, sort of like September to November. So that's not a good time to plant ivy because its general energy would be going into flowering and fruiting. Generally speaking, the best time to plant anything is when it's not in flower, because that's when its energy is more into establishing its leaves or its roots. So if you buy a pot, then and it's not flowering and it's not fruiting, then just plant it early in the spring so that it's got the best chance to get itself going into a flowering situation later in the year. It does take a few years before it will flower. It seems to need to establish itself, spreading and maximizing its leaf capacity. So yeah, I think that's really all I've got to say about ivy. Piers, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I really like ivy, and of course it's a super plant for wildlife, especially because of the time of year that it flowers. And there are many different cultivars of ivy. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and colors, and you can get some, for example, which have very tiny variegated leaves, which are very attractive. They make really nice house plants as well. Just to add about taking cuttings from ivy, which is really easy to do. You can almost take them at any time of year. Just be aware that if you take cuttings in the summer, they will, of course, root and take off much faster if you do it at a colder time of the year. You can also take cuttings and just stick them in a glass of water on the kitchen windowsill, and they will grow roots there into the water. And then when they've got a nice little bunch of roots, then you can pot them up and grow them on. So that's worth trying, especially if you've bought an attractive houseplant ivy and you want to spread it and maybe plant it in the garden as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you. I know the English ivy as a houseplant has a really good capability of helping to clean the air as well. So it's one of the top plants for indoor growing. And I'd love to just add that I used to live in the middle of the city. We had a tiny back garden, and the back fence was covered in ivy. It was a variegated ivy. It was planted before we were there. I don't know which one it was. But it was full of moths, and the birds would go in and out of it for the berries. And in the summer, we would have bats flying over because there were moths in the ivy. So it's an amazing plant for wildlife. But as Maureen said, it does, you need to plant it being aware of how quickly it will grow. And I did have to prune it back once or twice a year fairly hard. But the birds nested in it in the summertime, and it really did bring so much wildlife to our very small back garden, like inner city back garden. And for that reason, I definitely love ivy, as long as you know that, you do have to keep on top of maintaining it as well. But yes, I hope that's helped you, Joe. Thank you, Piers and Maureen. So on to question 3. This one's from Lee in Norwich, my hometown. I'd like to try growing sweet potatoes next year in my new greenhouse, but I hear it's not as simple as planting tubers like regular potatoes. Can you let me know how to go about it? Thank you, from Lee. So who'd like to take that one?
I can make a start if you like. Sweet potatoes, yes, they're generally grown from shoots, which are called slips, that have grown from the tubers. And what is a good idea is to, if you haven't grown them before, is to buy these slips either from a seed merchant online, or there are even people on YouTube selling these independently. And they will arrive as little shoots, which you can pot up somewhere warm, like a greenhouse or a conservatory, and grow them on from there. The sweet potato is a vine, actually. It's related to morning glory. It produces leaves that are edible and a beautiful kind of pale purple flower. So it's a very attractive plant, actually, just to have in a conservatory or something like that. So you want a fairly big pot so that there's room for the tubers to grow, and it has quite a long growing season. So you generally start it around April time. No point in buying any slips now. Wait until April, then buy them, then plant them and grow it on. And you'll need to wait until at least September. And when the foliage all dies off, that's the time to have a look in the pot and see what tubers you've grown. One important thing is to make sure that when you buy the slips initially, they will be from a variety that's good for growing in this country, whichever country that you're in, which is why buying a sweet potato from a supermarket and just stick it in the soil is not the best idea, because it probably was grown overseas and will be a different variety that's not so suitable for this country. But definitely worth having a go. And of course, once you've grown it once, you can then make your own slips to grow again in future years. So you don't necessarily have to buy them in each year. But I'll be doing that this year. So good luck to you, Lee.
Good luck, Lee. Maureen, do you have anything to add to that?
The only thing I can add to that, to Piers's full answer, that was great, is that they really like sandy soils. They really like a lot of drainage, and it's quite easy to overwater them. They just don't like to have their roots in the wet. So the more you can mix sand into your potting compost, or whatever you're going to plant it in, or the bed you're going to plant it in, the better, the happier your sweet potatoes will be. And once you do get them established, the slips established, and you have your first tubers, your first harvest, after that you're never going to get rid of them. They're going to be in the bed, and they'll be producing so many shoots you won't know what to do with them all. So it's quite a prolific growing plant, and it like the ivy, it kind of establishes quite a strong ground cover as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. My allotment is very sandy soil, and they grow really nicely out there. If we have a good year, that is weather-wise for them. And the first time I grew them, I was so excited about digging them up, and they were so tiny, but so satisfying, and they still tasted amazing. And then I propagated and had the slips for the future, and so I just grow them each year now as well. So that's great. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Jimmy, I believe, if I've got the order of questions correctly. Is now a good time to plant fruit trees and bushes, or should I wait till spring? Who would like to take that one?
Do you want to say something, Piers?
Okay, sure. Well, just briefly, it depends whether they're bare root or potted plants that you're planting out. And if it's bare root, which is quite common and the cheapest way of doing it, then now is the absolutely perfect time to do it. So basically, it's in the dormant season, in the middle of winter. As long as the soil isn't frozen or waterlogged, then now is the time to do it. If they're potted plants, then really you can plant them out at any time of year. But from now, for the next 2 months is the perfect time to do it.
And energetically, I would add that it's always better to plant trees or shrubs after the full moon, sort of as the energy is falling of the moon, because the sap rises at the time of between the new moon and the full moon, and then it moves back down again after the full moon. So it's always better to plant on a waning moon, and ideally towards the end of the sun, like getting towards the dark of the moon, just before the new moon, because then the energy is going down into the roots, and that's what you're wanting to do. You're wanting the tree, the plant, to establish its roots as quickly as it can.
That's so interesting. I feel the need for a future gardener's question time about moon gardening or something in that arena, because so many more people are much more interested in like the natural cycle and how that all how that all comes together and helps us growing. So thanks so much. Super interesting. I also kind of feel like when you're planting trees and bushes at this time of year, we always, as gardeners, think we can rest, but there's never any rest for a gardener. There is always something to do outside in the garden. So, if you feel stuck inside and you want to get outside, then go and plant a tree or a bush, and that's good for you and good for the environment. Okay, thank you so much. Hope that's helpful for you, Jimmy. So the next question is from Sarah, and Sarah says, some of my family members have come down with a winter flu. Any recommendations on herbal cures, and is there anything I can gather from the wild or grow in my garden? By the way, they have all had flu and COVID jabs, though I'm not sure it's not connected. Merry Christmas from fit and healthy unvaccinated Sarah. So Maureen, perhaps you'd like to take this one first. What ideas do you have for that?
Well, at this time of year, the main thing that you could access would be roots. So if there's any angelica roots that are warming aromatics and anti-infective, then that might be something that's available. And there's also elecampane, which that's in the sunflower family, and it grows these big leaves and tall stems in the spring and summer, and then in the winter it has this quite substantial root, and that's also a warming aromatic anti-infective root. So those two, you'd need to have your identification correct during the summer to know where to dig up the roots. Autumn time, sort of this kind of time, is the best time to dig up roots that you want to be much more nourishing, because they've been filled up and topped up all throughout the summer and early autumn with sugars and starches. So the roots harvested in autumn time are much more nutritive and nourishing. Whereas by the time you get to springtime and the plants are starting to leaf and stem again, then there's not so much sugar left because they've survived the winter with that, and B, they're having to mobilize what is still left to get the growing up and going again. So if you want bitter tonics that are much more stimulating, like dandelion root to stimulate the liver, then you might choose to harvest those in early spring, just when they're starting to think about leafing again. That's the time to harvest bitter roots. But if you want the nourishing roots, then you do that now. You can still harvest things like dandelion or even nettle roots now to decoct and make as a sort of winter warmer and mildly nourishing. So most of the other things at this time of year that would be leafing will have lost their leaves, apart from things like pine needles, any of the evergreens, the cypress or conifer family. So pine needles, you can make an anti-infective astringent tea for sinuses or infected lungs as well. You could use that, and you can also use them as a steam inhalation, especially if there's like any cones still there or any buds that's got resin. Or you can collect resin from the bark as well, which you'd probably be best to grind in a pestle and mortar to get into either a powder, depending on how hard the resin is. Either you could powder it or just get it with a bigger surface area that you could then take you could try and take a small amount of that, but the resin kind of sticks to your teeth. You really need to kind of dry the resin out and then grind it to a powder, and you can take that internally. I think that's really all I can come up with. I'm sure Juliet's got some more foraging techniques or ideas.
In the meantime, I think Juliet was perhaps just here to tell us about the event, but
I see.
That's a good reminder for everyone, absolutely, that in January the 18th, if you come along to the Vegan Organic Network's Gardening Question Time, we'll be able to find out so much more about foraging in the wild, and it will be a good seasonal guide. So you'll be prepared at least for next year's colds.
Yeah. I mean,
You know?
sometimes there's fruits and berries that are still, if there hasn't been too many howling gales and the birds have left you some, there may be some hawthorn berries still kicking around. But the elderberries, which would be the most specific thing to help with winter flu season, they get snapped up very quickly by the birds. Yeah, so I mean, you might be lucky if there's still some berries on the trees.
Yeah, that's a lot of information, you know. And Piers, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I'm sure everybody knows that things like ginger and garlic are useful and easy to grow at home. One thing to bear in mind, of course, is that some of the active ingredients in useful plants are water soluble and some are not. So that will govern how you then extract that and use it. So, for example, thyme, which is a useful plant for colds, you can make a tea because it's water soluble, whereas something like echinacea, which is also famously used to help you with colds and infections and things like that, in that case, it's actually a non-water soluble substance in the root of the plant. So with that, you'd need to make a tincture with alcohol, which is usually vodka based, so that you can extract the ingredient that way.
Thank you. I like the addition of alcohol for tinctures. There's something about that when you have a cold, just having a little tincture. Yeah. And of course, there's the prevention side of it as well. So perhaps if either of you have any ideas, like in the run up to, you know, the cold and flu season, what kind of herbal medicines should we be storing away as a prevention to catching colds in the first place? Is there anything? I know echinacea is a particularly good one, but if there's anything else either of you would like to add to that?
Well,
Go on.
So I was just going to say that the two that are best known as preventatives, we've already mentioned. So echinacea, and as Maureen says, elderberry as well is really well known as a preventative.
But the echinacea traditionally, because it's not a European plant, it's a Native American plains plant. It was traditionally used for wounds, particularly arrow wounds from you know, having some run-ins with each other. So how they would prepare it from the dried root was they would chew it. So, you know, then you get some of these very specific sugar-based, glycoside-based constituents, which make your tongue tingle. It's very activating. It's like my kids used to call it electric medicine. So when you're chewing it, you can feel that tingling starting, and it starts to stimulate the salivary glands, and then they would pack the wound with what they chewed. So they'd have a therapeutic internal dose from the chewing of it, and then you would pack the wound to protect the cut and from bacteria penetrating through any cut, and it would mobilize the immune cells to the site. So it had a very, very different traditional use. And of course, native people wouldn't have had such access to alcohol unless they had a potsheen still or something. You know, they would have, a lot of the roots would have been decocted for a long time, which means you use cold water first of all to sort of try and hydrate the dried roots again, if that's what you've got. And then you let the water slowly come up to a boil. Then once it hits a boil, you turn it down to a simmer for about 10-15 minutes with the lid on, particularly if there's volatile oils in the roots like angelica and the elecampane we mentioned earlier.
That's so interesting.
And you kind of cook it. You have it on a low heat and the longer you can do that, the better in a way. And it also kind of concentrates it as well a bit. So in the absence of alcohol, sorry, Ellen.
No, carry on.
You can still extract using this kind of like slow heating method we call decoction, which is specific for roots, seeds, barks, which are much more difficult to extract from because they're so much tougher than a leaf or a flower. And the other thing that I would suggest is you could freeze things like blackcurrants or blueberries, or you could freeze these high vitamin C containing fruits and put them in your smoothie, or put them, whatever, as a preventative. I'm a great believer in essential oils as preventative. So you can use antiviral oils like Ravensera or any of the tea tree family. There's a few different cousins, Nioli, Cajeput, even things like myrrh and frankincense. You can do a little mix of essential oil that you can keep on you. I was in London last month and having to use public transport 2 hours a day, and I would have my oil with me, and I would put a few drops on my palm, rub my hands together to get it into the skin, and then I would inhale like 2 or 3 deep breaths, and I knew that was kind of like protecting all my airways, cleaning my hands, and so I can press all the open close buttons and hold on to the handles and not worry so much, so I think that's a really good way as a preventative to really just keep you safe and keep you clean.
Amazing. And just eating, lots of homegrown or veganic if possible, vegetables and fruit, because that's just helping your immune system and your whole health overall, isn't it? So that's great. I think we've literally got a couple of minutes left, but I think we can squeeze in one more question and answer to it, because it's a very Christmassy question also. So John in Dorset, he says, why does my holly bush not have any berries? So if either of you would like to take that one, probably the last question of this GQT. Go for it.
I can start if you like. That there are various reasons for this. The most common one is that you've got a male plant, because hollies are either male or female, and of course it's only the females that have the flowers and then the berries. So one thing to look out for, which often gets people, is there's a particular variety called Silver Queen, which is actually a male, and that confuses a lot of people. So if you've got a Silver Queen holly, you're not going to get any berries there. And similarly, there's Golden King, which is female. But anyway, so that's the first thing to look out for. But it is also possible, if you do have a female, let's say you've got the Golden King, it will need a male plant to be in the vicinity in order for it to be pollinated. So they're pollinated by insects, and so you would need a male within, let's say, 100 meters in order for it to pollinate and grow berries. So if there isn't one around, that might be another reason. And of course, there are other reasons that are possible, like poor growing conditions that year, lack of pollinators, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Maureen, anything extra to add to that?
Also, they're really slow growers. They take a long time to establish any length of stem, and so because it takes so long for them to get established and to really get their growth going, that flowering and fruiting is going to be sort of low down on the list of priorities. So it depends on how old your tree is as well. You have to kind of be patient.
That's something us gardeners have to learn, right? Patience is key when growing, for sure. So hopefully that's helped you with that question, and next year you'll have an abundance of berries for you and the birds. So thank you so much, Piers and Maureen, for all of your expert knowledge and spending the time here this evening answering those questions. I feel like if anyone was on public transport around you, Maureen, they would have just had this beautiful smell, and also perhaps wondered what you were doing, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, it hopefully would have made public transport smell a little nicer. Thank you so much to both of you. Do check out Piers's book and also Maureen's website with their upcoming open days. And also, I'd just like to remind you all to please join the Vegan Organic Network. You can find out more on the website, veganorganic.net. There's loads of resources, events, information, loads of stuff on there to help you grow. Yeah, Piers is doing the perfect, like he's perfectly placed for the logo, just to help you grow in a vegan way, supporting the growing revelation for a green, clean, cruelty-free world. So thank you all for being here this evening, and I look forward to the next Gardener's Question Time.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Piers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Goodbye.